All right, shame is something I've been wanting to explore on this podcast, and I have the perfect guest for this topic. AJ Bond is the author of the book Discomfortable: What is Shame and How Can We Break Its Hold? He's a shame educator and coach certified as a shame healing practitioner by the Center for Healing Shame in Berkeley. Welcome, AJ.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here as well. I've loved reading your book. Congratulations. What a great piece of work, an excellent resource.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into it more. I think it'll be really useful with my clients. But I have you here,
I
so
hope so.
I'm excited to pick your brain and learn so much from you because I know that you love talking about shame and you are an expert. So maybe you can just start this by telling us, what is shame?
Well, first, I want to say I have a bit of a shamey aversion to the word expert because it's like it brings up my shame around, am I really an expert? Like, I don't have a PhD. I'm not a scientist. So it's
Of
like
course.
I just wanted to name that because that's a little bit of my own shame for you right there. But what is it? Yeah, so what just happened there? A little bit of shame came up around that word. What just happened? I think the way I've been thinking about it recently on the kind of really most simple level is this is an unpleasant sensation that seems to point to myself. So it's a whole, for me, it's a whole family of feelings, a kind of spectrum of intensities of this unpleasantness that makes us look inward, that makes us say, oh, there's something about me, about my actions, about myself, about my essence, perhaps, or about my place in the group that makes me feel bad, makes me feel unpleasant. That's sort of just like my most basic definition for shame right now on my shame journey. It's
Yeah,
always
absolutely.
evolving.
And shame is an emotion that you say everybody has.
Yeah. I think where there's some confusion is people use different words like guilt or shame or embarrassment, humiliation. So when I talk about shame, I'm really talking about a whole family that includes all of that. And I'm inspired by particularly a theory of emotion called affect theory, which posits that it's really just a feeling in our body that we interpret in different ways in terms of different intensities and different situations. So shame affect, the feeling and body state of shame, you might sometimes interpret it as just shyness or embarrassment or shame proper or guilt or humiliation. So I think that's why we sometimes think, oh, I don't have a lot of shame, but yeah, I do sometimes feel shy or embarrassed. So for me, it's this feeling that's universal. We all have that unpleasant self-awareness. And sometimes it's really healthy, sometimes really helpful. It can help us see when we've hurt someone else or transgressed our values. And sometimes it can be toxic and kind of maladaptive and limiting.
Thank you for highlighting that because I was just thinking, well, like what I find with my clients is that shame can be paralyzing at the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
But I don't think about shyness and guilt as necessarily paralyzing. So it sounds like it's a spectrum.
Yeah. And I think when it becomes paralyzing, we're getting into that toxic version of shame, which is for me, an intensity of that feeling, of that unpleasantness that makes it hard to handle
Yeah.
physically, and usually interpretations, stories, beliefs about self that have been kind of wired into that feeling so that when that unpleasant feeling comes up, it has this second hit of I'm bad or flawed or wrong. So it's just two really disempowering physical and mental attacks.
I am here. I had a session yesterday with a client, and I'm just hearing her words echo in my ears as you're saying this right now, where she was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't understand why I'm like this.
Yeah.
And
So relatable.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's relatable. Tell me about your journey with shame.
Yeah. Well, so I'm gay, and growing up in the 80s and 90s, in my family culture, in the culture I was born in, it just seemed to me like the worst thing that I could possibly be. Like, why am I having these feelings? Why am I, oh, I feel emotion come up even now. It's like that subject is just wired into my brain in such a um, powerful and painful way. So yeah, so just feeling like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Why am I like this? How did this happen? What did I do wrong? Um, Struggling with that, and then eventually coming to terms with my sexual orientation, coming out, making gay friends, being accepted by my friends and family. But that deep sense of what's wrong with me, like your client said, it continued. It sort of lost its original. I think, my sexual orientation growing up in a kind of heteronormative society, a big kernel for this feeling of what's wrong with me, but other things as well, like family, intergenerational family shame, things like that. So even though it kind of lost one of its big justifications, it was just wired in there. This deep belief, deep in my like brain, in my inner child, that there's something wrong with me, and that in a way is still with me. It's a wiring that's I think very gradually softening, but more than anything else, I'm just more comfortable seeing it, knowing what it is. And that is the result of going to therapy. That's kind of how it started for me. My therapist, luckily for me, was able to say, like, I think this thing you're talking about, this like feeling, is shame. And that I was like, oh wow, oh, is it? And it just set me on this journey. I started listening to every Brene Brown interview, reading every book I could find on the subject. And the more I read, the more I was like, absolutely. Like, this is the core issue for me, is this deep internalized sense that there's something wrong with me. And it kind of there was a powerful moment, I don't know exactly, maybe a year into this exploration, where I had a kind of breakthrough, a kind of like almost spiritual type little mini awakening moment, where a lot of the shame I was struggling with seemed to kind of separate from me. And I realized it wasn't me. It was a shift where shame became an object. Instead of being me, I'm shameful, I'm contained. It's like, oh, there's me, and then there's shame, and they're different things. And I saw how a lot of the beliefs in that shame, like the feeling isn't me, and the beliefs attached to it, they're not even my beliefs. Like, they're not my opinions. They like were given to me as a child, and I just believed them. So that was a really powerful moment, but my shame didn't go away. So since then, and that was like 5 years ago, I've just been still on a journey of like how best to relate to this feeling that doesn't go away, how best to relate to this wiring around there's something wrong with me, which also doesn't just quickly go away. It's almost like the analogy I like to use is, on some level, my first language is English. It's deeply ingrained. And emotionally, it's kind of like my first language is shame. It's deeply ingrained on that same level of intensity as English. And I can't expect that I'm just going to switch to Spanish really quickly just because I see that I'd rather speak Spanish. So that's what it's like with shame, is I'm gradually trying to learn a second language, which is really hard to do as an adult, a second emotional language. Does that
Mm.
make sense?
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And I'm also thinking about how, I talk a lot about how we have feelings and we have thoughts, but we aren't our feelings and we
Yes.
aren't our thoughts. And the less we can attach to them and kind of integrate with them, the better.
Yeah, and that's exactly what that breakthrough moment I think was
Mm.
a real sudden shift where I realized I'm not these feelings and I'm not these thoughts. They didn't, like, I thought after that would mean they would just leave me forever. They didn't, but at least I've never believed them quite as much
Yeah,
since.
totally. So freeing.
Yeah, it was the I felt like bliss after that moment for like a month. But then gradually my shame came back and I was all confused. I was like, I thought I got rid of this. Like, what? And so now it's been a journey of befriending shame, not getting rid of it, but befriending it like a chronic condition.
So I have a wondering, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to put it into words the way I want to, but I'm curious if you talk about shame being your first like emotional language. I'm kind of curious if that was always true and being gay was how it was magnified, or if realizing that you were gay in a very heteronormative community is what first caused the shame. Is that clear?
Yes, absolutely clear. And um, I am, for my money, it's the latter.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I think we might be born, I might be an HSP, I might be a highly sensitive person, that my understanding, which is limited, is that that's a very real thing. Like people can be much more sensitive emotionally, would definitely seem to be born with some intrinsic sense of introversion or extroversion, things like that. But I don't think that those things inherently bring us shame until they cause a sense of rupture or disconnection with the important people in our lives. So I don't think a child is just born full of shame, but I could
Sure.
be wrong. I could be wrong. Um, there are definitely people who seem to have a lot more shame than other people, and I don't know exactly what causes that. There could be something biological to it, but I think mostly when we're talking about toxic shame or problematic shame in our lives, it is shame that as a child, it's some kind of subject that seemed to cause a rupture with our caregivers. Perhaps even like a persistent rupture, like a bunch of small ruptures, like complex trauma type ruptures. And very gradually, the child who's very egocentric and sort of interprets the whole world as like about me or my fault, good or bad, naturally says, oh, like there's something about me that causes my parents to like shrink away, or important adults or people in my life to shrink away. What's wrong with me? It's that question again. Oh, like, what did I do to cause them to shrink away? And it doesn't occur to us at that age that they have their own shame and their own imperfections and their own trauma. So we just very naturally blame ourselves. And I think that is adaptive, it's instinctive, because for a few reasons. If we saw that our parents were flawed, it could create anger in us, which could be unsafe for us to get angry at our caregivers, to be like, it's your fault, dad, it's your fault, mom. Like that could be dangerous for a child that's helpless and needs their support. Plus, we have more control over ourselves. So if we interpret it as our fault, we can find strategies to mitigate it, which are actually going to save our lives as children. So it's very adaptive and useful as a child to think this way, to blame ourselves, and to change. Oh, every time I want physical affection, my parent pulls away. There must be something wrong with me for wanting physical affection. I will stop wanting it in order to fit in and be safe. So as a child, that's helpful. But then that wires in, and that is a story that we carry into adulthood where it becomes maladaptive, no longer useful to be seeing it as our fault. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it really does. And it when you were talking, I was thinking about something that Brene Brown says, and she's the first person who introduced shame to me. It wasn't actually an emotion that I related to at all, which maybe
Yeah.
is part of how it's
Manifests.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was in the same context that she said, whenever you're looking for a way that you don't belong, you'll always find it.
Yeah.
And I didn't remember that that was directly related to shame, and maybe it's not, but from what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like those pieces are tied together.
For sure. I think when we feel that we don't belong, shame is the feeling that comes up, the alarm that says danger. Because as a social animal, um, for our ancestors and for our biology, it really is life or death to belong. That's like one of our core needs, I think. All of our needs are met in the context of belonging as a social animal. So to some extent, I need to belong in order to meet my basic needs to have shelter and food and safety. So yeah, shame is like, you might not belong. And generally that's because there's something wrong with you. Fix yourself, change yourself. And as a child, that's literally true. It's like, well, it's not literally true, but it's literally true that you need your parents to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like I got lost for a second there. Am I on track?
Yeah, you're doing perfectly.
Okay.
And shame is, so it sounds like shame has an adaptive purpose. It's a healthy emotion,
Yes, it certainly can be.
or it can be, but it becomes this like toxic emotion.
Yeah, I think we're feeling healthy shame all the time. Just this morning, I was thinking about, I'm laughing because I'm like, I don't know how much of this story I want to tell because it's a little bit inane, but like, I realized that I have to use these special flossers for my like, I have all these fake teeth. I have to like go around them. And I realized that, oh, I should be breaking these little plastic loops because I don't want animals to get like caught in them. And then I thought about all these little loops that I've thrown into the garbage, and I felt healthy shame about, oh, I don't want to be contributing to hurting animals. I don't even really want to be contributing to plastic in the garbage. And I felt like motivated and excited in a way to be like, how can I fix this? How can I better dispose of these? Is there a better way I could be doing this? And that's not the kind of shame that paralyzes and oppresses me. It's the kind of shame where I'm like, it motivates me to do better, to align with my values. So every day I'm making little mistakes or growing or seeing new things and feeling like kind of like, oh, I feel bad for not having been able to do that in the past. And I want to be able to live up to that in the future. And I think there's like healthy shame in that. Anytime we make a mistake that we view as an actual mistake that aligns with our values, or anytime that we experience an interpersonal rupture with an important person, there'll be shame. And that just reminds us that we want to belong, that it's safe to belong, that it feels good to belong, and that we care. So again, that seems like very adaptive shame. It's when we internalized these childhood ruptures and blamed ourselves and hold on to that. That's the shame that really disempowers me. That's the shame that can attack me when I'm all alone. I'm all alone and I think about, still like certain gay related shames can hit me. And that's just like this deep self-blame and self-rejection of my own authenticity that is really no longer helpful to me because I don't need it to fit in. I can find new people to fit in with if I really need to. It's sapping me of motivation, and it's sapping my authenticity to just show up in the world and be like, this is my truth. And it's plaguing me when I'm all alone. Like, there's no one around. I'm just thinking and feeling shame. So that's when I really start to question, like, okay, there's no real person here that I'm having a break with. I haven't, gone against my values. So this seems like some old shame trigger.
And so when you recognize that happening, when you're going into a shame spiral, is that when you start beating yourself up about it, or what do you do to break it?
There's different ways that I might go about it. First of all, I have to notice that I'm in it. It's like it'll happen just so naturally. It's so patterned, so old, so like my kind of default that I'll be beating myself up unconsciously. I'll be feeling unpleasant. And then there needs to be a moment where I'm like, wait, I'm in shame. What's going on here? So that is the first step. I have to be able to notice it. I have to have that self-awareness. And that is really hard. It took me a really long time to be able to name shame while I'm feeling it because it's so uncomfortable that I'm much more prone to go into some kind of defensive strategy. I like distraction, numbing, some kind of inner critic or usually some form of numbing will come about. Mm-hmm. And so I'll be running from the shame, which is actually just sort of elongating it in a way. So then I have to notice it and I have to like, okay, now I have to confront this. I have to look at it. In fact, there was something like that for me today. Over the last few days, I realized I've been in like a bit of a funk. I realized it was shame, and I realized what it was about. And what I did this time was to look at the messages that were shaming me. There was this message that my life wasn't right. Like, oh, I need to fix this and I need to get this sorted out. And I actually just looked at those messages and I said, that's not true. I don't believe that. And I actually found a bit of anger, and I directed the anger towards those shaming messages. So it was kind of like an old inner critic with some cultural beliefs that I actually didn't believe in anymore, that were just operating automatically, saw them for what they were, and gave them some anger, some like, no, some boundary energy. I'm not going to believe that. I'm not going to go there. And so I kind of took the message of shame, which was saying, essentially, you need to belong with these norms. And I inverted it. And I said, the reason I'm suffering is not because I don't belong with these norms. The reason I'm suffering is because I'm trying to belong with norms that aren't authentic to me anymore. So you can kind of like play with the interpretations of shame in ways that can make it empowering instead of disempowering. Does that make sense? I find it hard to explain.
Well, I have so many questions about it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really helpful to get really granular about it. And so Brene Brown says that shame like fosters and like secrecy, judgment, silence, right?
Yeah.
And that it's really empathy that, I don't know if it's the cure, but it is can soften the shame.
Yes. So I would say that's like a slightly separate antidote to the one I was working with today.
Really?
In that case, I might have found an empathetic listener and said, oh, I'm feeling all this shame about how my life isn't perfect and I haven't figured this out and figured that out. Like, can you relate? And had a friend be like, totally. I haven't figured this out. I haven't figured that out. And between us, we create a sense of okayness. Like, oh, I'm still acceptable. You're still acceptable, even though we're imperfect in these ways. We haven't like done all the things we think we need to do. It can really soften the shame and just create a sense of, it's not that I'm bad and won't fit in because I'm imperfect in these ways. In fact, I'm normal and will fit in specifically because of these imperfections. So that would be more the for me at least, the version of an empathy antidote.
I felt like you were expressing a little bit of empathy with yourself, just in the willingness to get curious about what is this.
Absolutely.
That is softness rather than turning at it, you know? But I love that example of doing it in partnership with somebody else versus like the strong boundaries that you did with yourself.
Yeah. I think that's so important. You're absolutely right. It was a self-compassion, self-empathy move. And I think I needed to receive that externally in the past to know that it was possible from like my therapist in particular and close trusting friends. But then over receiving that, you're gradually able to kind of internalize it for yourself. And you're absolutely right. In the past, I would have probably believed the shaming inner critic and kind of sided with them and been like, yeah, AJ, figure your crap out. But because of this self-compassion work, I was able to say, wait, let's question these beliefs. Who said you have to be perfect at that or have this figured out? Oh, well, I'm 42. Like, doesn't a 40? No. Who said? So that's where I start to have my own back and get some anger, which is new for me. Anger is hard to have when you're a lot of self-shaming and create that boundary. So you're absolutely right.
Interesting. The part I wanted to get granular about that you were saying, because I'm fascinated with the process of hearing our thoughts rather than being thrown by the wave of emotions, but really being able to kind of anchor ourselves and just notice the emotions. And you're describing so much of that, which in my experience, has been helped a lot through like a mindfulness practice. And I'm
Yes.
curious if you have a practice that helps you separate from your emotions, because I feel like a lot of people that are listening to this maybe don't really have a mindfulness practice and don't even get how to get a step away from emotions rather than just be the emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely am a big meditator, and that has been huge. The like just to be able to notice is already that piece of mindfulness, that piece of separation, to say that's not me. So I can like have a little bit of distance and look at it and examine it rather than just believing it. So meditating has been super helpful with that, as well as parts work. I've done work like focusing, internal family systems, um, and there's others. I'm trying to think of some other examples, but that's a good start. They're just systems that really get you thinking about your your impulses, your emotions, patterns as these kind of separate entities. Sometimes it can even sound a bit embarrassing, but it actually really helps to create that differentiation, that difference, that space to be able to see them as just to have the room to see them. Yeah. And so yeah, meditation is part of my daily routine.
I think it really shows in how you talk through all this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
It to be able to like see my inner landscape is something I feel a lot of pride about. It's like I may not have like cured my shame or whatever. I don't even know what that means, but like just to be able to find a kind of okayness within it all is a really, which I can't always do, but when I can, it's like something I'm like, oh, I'm so thankful for this.
You talked about curing shame, but you've also mentioned how it can be like reinterpreted in powerful and liberating ways, to use your words. So what is that process of like, if shame isn't bad and we're learning to live with it, what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of like curing shame, I have this like sort of two big shame things. One is shame comes up. How do I deal with it? But then there's the deeper thing of like, why does that shame come up? And is there a way that I could have it come up less? And so reinterpreting it is more, shame is coming up. What do I do with it? Rather than this sort of like deeper, much, much, much more gradual work of how would I trigger my shame less? And so when
Hmm.
when shame comes up for me, I traditionally was in my childhood. Again, this is sort of like wiring, conditioning type stuff. Based on my culture and based on my own interpretation, this feeling became associated with the story that I'm bad. So it basically meant that every time I felt this sensation, another neuron lit up that said, this sensation means I'm bad. And anytime I thought, oh, I'm bad, the neuron would automatically link to shame. So like a very disempowering combo. So one of the big first moves that I had to start working on was separating out that when this feeling comes up, it doesn't actually mean I'm bad. However, that doesn't mean that the neuron that says I'm bad won't light up as well. So there's again, it's kind of like a meta self-awareness move where you're able to see the shame, be like, oh, there's the thought that I'm bad, and also contain a knowing that that's not true, that that's an old interpretation from the past. And it helps to start exploring shame and discovering that it has other meanings. Shame is the warning. There's many ways you could reinterpret it. Shame is the warning that there's some kind of interpersonal rupture or that there could be some kind of interpersonal rupture. So just a definition like that helps me reinterpret. Okay, so shame doesn't mean I'm bad. Shame means that I'm worried that there is or might be a rupture with some kind of important person. And there's other ways that you could think of shame as well. Tried to think of some other reinterpretation. Well, the guilt interpretation is a really good way to do it. Some people like to separate shame and guilt as shame means I am bad, and guilt means I did a bad thing. So and I consider those both shame, the feeling, with different interpretations. So it's worth noting that when I'm feeling bad, there might be a version of that, a reinterpretation that actually says, oh, actually, I just made a mistake somewhere. This isn't always true. Like shame can be triggered when you haven't made a mistake. But under certain situations, you can see, oh, yeah, I said that thing. It came out really harshly, created a bit of a rupture with my friend. And then shame came up and I said, oh, why did I do that? Because I'm bad. And I can then be like, no, that's not actually the story. The story is, yes, there was a rupture. And I think that I did make a mistake. And I'm feeling this shame because of the mistake and the rupture. And when I focus on it like that, it's a lot clearer what I want to do. I want to repair the rupture and I want to apologize for the mistake that I made. Whereas the other interpretation, it's worth noting, if I'm bad and that's why I said that thing and made that rupture, there's no solution. All I can really do is hide my badness and beat up on myself in order to kind of atone for my badness, which I think is how I lived with shame for a really long time. Like, I'm bad, and I'm actually going to, like, in a way, unconsciously choose to beat up on myself to atone for the badness that I don't think I can ever fix or change. So we get into situations like that where it's very limiting, paralyzing, like you said. And when we can find these different reinterpretations, there's just a bigger menu of possibilities for how you can fix the situation if there was a mistake, or just have more self-compassion, more possibility.
It expands your options and your agency, which is like, we all want that.
Yeah. And that, I think that's what's so awful about shame, is that it tricks you. Toxic shame tricks you into thinking there is no options, there is no possibilities, there is no agency. And that is a hopeless place. I feel emotion coming up in me again. Yeah. Because I think I get trapped in that hopeless place a lot. And in the past, I think I lived a lot of my life from that hopeless place. And if you're into like polyvagal theory at all, which we could get into a bit, I think that for me, that place is a very like dorsal vagal shutdown. So it's like a collapsed state that our ancestors literally used to play dead in order to trick predators into thinking that we're dead. So it's a kind of like, it is a kind of death, a kind of hopelessness, kind of powerlessness that I carry around because I don't see that there are actually options. There is actually anger energy, action energy, boundary energy that I can use to escape. But I don't see that. I don't let myself do that.
Interesting. That's that paralyzed feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually like a physiological paralysis in a way too. It's like a literally the classic, a gazelle is running from a predator. The predator catches them, the gazelle goes into this collapse, this death, and the predator relaxes, and then the gazelle runs away. So that state of the collapse is very like healthy for that moment, but not if you live from that place. If you walk around in the world from that place, it's numb, it's dead, it's hopeless, it's awful. It's truly awful.
And it's interesting.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you said that the first thing that, or a way that you like to cope with feelings of, or don't, okay. It's interesting that you said that what you turn to cope with feelings of shame is kind of like numbing out. It's like a very familiar.
Yeah, it's like more of that death state, in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, which I think creates more shame and more hopelessness and more paralysis and less vitality. Shame saps us of our vitality. It really does. In fact, in affect theory, they describe shame as an emotional attenuator. So they actually see shame as the move of diminishing other emotions. So literally, shame is like this vacuum created when our system shuts another emotion down.
Wow.
So again, this vacuum, this death, this void, this numbness is all very shamey.
So then I'm curious if you are also working with your nervous system as you are working with shame.
Um, I think so. Like in my mindfulness practice, I have a lot of embodiment practice to be paying attention to my body. Where am I feeling things? Where is it? Is it in my stomach? Is it in my like chest area? Is it in my throat? To be very aware of that and tracking that, I think is a nervous system practice. But I don't know. Like when I hear the word nervous system, I don't know. There's a sense of like uncertainty, like how expert I am with the nervous system. So that's why I
Mhm.
had a little bit of hesitance to like, oh, am I working fine? But yes, in a kind of implicit feeling sense way, yes.
It's fascinating. In your work coaching, are you finding that women present shame differently than men present shame? Is it showing up differently among genders or
Hmm.
in couples? I don't know if you do any of that sort of work.
I don't do any explicit couples work. Does it show up differently? I think there's certain subject matter, certain norms that have been internalized by different identities as children. So it's like shame is going to show up for different reasons. And then I also think those norms impact the way we're allowed to feel and express our emotions. So I do think that a lot of men are shaming away, diminishing a lot of emotionality, a lot of tears, um, a lot of authentic sensitivities and things like that. That some women weren't shamed in quite the same way, where they have more access to some of their emotions like that. But then other emotions for women like anger might get shamed away, like it's inappropriate to show that. So I do see that there are kind of different clusters of norms that are shaming people on this implicit level. But then you never know. Like I have the thing where I don't, my anger gets shamed away. That's like, in fact, I think for a lot of people, their anger gets shamed away, or if they do feel like they're allowed to go into anger, it's usually a misdirected kind of anger that they're allowed to go into, and not really the primary anger that goes towards the real wounding, um, which generally is associated with something in childhood. So it's like I'm not going to get angry towards that, but I will get angry at um, the people who work below me, or my children, or my partner. Something like that is a safe and allowed, but it's not safe to get angry in these actual in the to get angry at the actual problem is not safe. That's often the case with shame. It's like we talked about in the childhood thing. As a child, it's not really safe to get angry at your parent or even to really see when it's their fault. So you blame yourself. So we keep that going into adulthood. And it's safer to blame myself than get angry at someone who is clearly crossing my boundaries or abusing me or something like that.
Whew. Like I'm just along for a little therapy session here.
Well, me too, because this is like right on my learning edge.
It's really deep. And I also, I guess one last point I will ask about is around authenticity
Yeah,
and how, did I already ask that?
I don't think so.
Um, and how shame gets in the way of authenticity. Because as you're speaking, it just seems really hard to ignore the fact that we're not showing up as we really want to if we're carrying around a lot of shame of who we are.
Yeah, yeah. It's absolutely the kind of the core of it in a way. I am bad. There's like that message has gotten wired in there. I think I'm bad. And it's just so easy. Like you said, if you're looking for ways that you don't belong, you'll find them. with that core message or wound that I'm like bad or flawed or wrong, whatever it is, you'll just find so many examples of the truth of that.
Yeah.
Oh, today it's because I said this, or because I like that, or because I can't do this. Like, just it all kind of gets absorbed in. And so with that will be all these authenticities. Yeah, my authenticity might be that uh, I cry a lot, but then because I'm bad, I've really connected to the norm that like crying is weak. So I have to shame my authentic desire to cry and my authentic emotions. And I have to use that shame, like I said, to literally like diminish them, to kind of hide them, squash them away, repress them, push them into the shadow. Um, and I have to kind of walk around like that in that numb, repressed state, because it seems like if I let that be seen, it will prove to people what I deeply fear, which is that I'm bad, and they will then reject me, and I won't belong, and I will die frightened, sad, and alone because I'm a social animal. I think that's essentially what's going on, but we may not be conscious of it like that. It might just be like, oh, I'd be embarrassed to cry. It'd be embarrassing. But I think if you really followed that trail, it's like it will reveal that I'm bad and I will be rejected and I will die because I will be alone, and I will suffer because I will be alone. But one way that I'm trying to reinterpret shame is, instead of shame saying, if you show this difference, you will suffer, I like to think of it sometimes as, if you hide this difference, you will suffer, which is equally, it's true. Like, repressing and hiding these things is suffering. It's saying, don't conform, don't be inauthentic. You will suffer. And how you will suffer is you'll feel shame, and you'll feel lonely, and you'll feel disconnected. So I kind of use the pain of shame sometimes and flip it to be a reminder to be more authentic, to be different, to show up in that, and to say, like, I need to be accepted in this. I need to find acceptance in my truth, or I will suffer. So it's like, it's just a fun little twist. Instead of saying, oh, I need to conform or I'll suffer, I say, I need to not conform or I will suffer. And of course, I want to name, sometimes I will reveal my authenticity and I will be rejected. And then I'll feel shame. And that might be like, oh, I should have never shown my authenticity. But what that's really suggesting is you should live a life of shame. You should stay in shame for safety. And that is absolutely not a joyful life. So I think it's still true. If you don't show your truth, you will suffer. You'll suffer a life of hiding. And we live in a world full of people. We don't live in a tribe anymore where if we get kicked out, we're going to die. We live in a world where we can absolutely find the people who will accept our authenticity, and we can find that joy and that truth. And so I kind of want to remind myself to keep pushing through rejection, that there will be my people out there, that they will be out there. And I have to keep reminding myself of that to get through those hiccups where it's like, oh, well, I actually did get rejected. Whoops.
It's such a good point that, for me, I'm feeling like, well, I have shown up inauthentically at times, and that is a shameful experience as well.
Totally. Yeah.
So I think the message is, you will feel the shame and do it anyway. Kind of like fear. You'll feel the fear and do it anyway. You'll feel the shame and do it anyway.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And this, I think a lot of us are waiting for the day that we don't feel the shame or don't feel the fear. And I think you bring up like such a valid point. It's like, that day may never come. We have to be able to move through these feelings. And for me, it helps to just talk about it. Like, I'm feeling shame, I'm feeling fear, but I have to be honest. And I feel shame that like my honesty will get me rejected, or it will be judged or something. So I'm feeling all of that. And here's my honesty anyway. This is what I have to do.
Such cool work. Amazing. It's like, Big stuff. Is there anything that I know that there's a lot I haven't asked you. Is there anything you feel like is important for people to know in this conversation today?
Well, something that's still kind of lingering with me is the anger, that the importance. Like anger can be a real misdirected problem. Like, Brene Brown and James Gilligan, who's a violence researcher, they talk about how shame and humiliation are the cause of violence. So there's definitely unhealthy ways that we can use our anger based on our shame by kind of misdirecting it at the wrong people. But if you can actually find the inner critic inside of you and the norms inside of you and separate from them and create some anger energy towards them. And it's important to know it's not anger at yourself. Like we've already done that through the inner critic. It's seeing a piece of cultural conditioning lodged inside of you and saying no to that, finding that anger. Or the inner critic that is, an internalization of a caregiver or parent from the past. Again, it's like finding that boundary towards that thing in the past that you internalized, being like no to that, because that anger energy is a vitality and an action that actually helps us get out of that collapse state. We actually kind of need to go into, remember how I talked about the gazelle falls and then runs away? The anger is the running away that you need to do to get back to relaxed grazing on the field. So you can't just go from collapsed to that. So it really does take reconnecting with vitality and a well-directed anger that is directed really at the core sources, not at yourself, not at other people, but at these bits of cultural conditioning inside of us that can really help to re-empower us, get us out of that funk, and give us the power to say my authenticity matters. My authenticity belongs in the world, belongs in my system, belongs in my actions. So yeah, I feel a bit of the tingles of that energy, and that's a place that I really want to find. And it's a bit counterintuitive because a lot of us were shamed for anger or for vitality or for joy. So what can happen is that you get caught in a loop. I'm in my collapse. I try to get into anger, and then it's like, no, anger's bad, shame that. So I fall back into my collapse. So my exit strategies are also shamed. So we kind of have to notice that and de-shame those a little bit. Be like, no, it is okay to get angry, even if it's a bit clumsy and I don't quite do it perfectly. It is okay to dance and spaz out and be excited, like even if it's a bit embarrassing. It's to find those exits, de-shame them, and then lean into them.
That's so powerful. It sounds like what you're describing is kind of completing a shame cycle, like allowing that last emotion to be one of anger and vitality and energy.
Yeah, it's absolutely
Mhm.
right. Shame essentially was saying you can't feel those things. I'm gonna have to trap you. And as we said, like shame takes other impulses, drives, and emotions and squishes them so they can't complete. And what we want to do is open it up and let that energy flow, let it flow so it can finish and it can move on. It's
Yeah.
ironic that I'll say, oh, I can't get angry, so I'll hold the anger for like ever rather than just letting the anger flow through me and go. Like that's how it goes away, is when I let it move through me. So we hold on to something in a misdirected strategy to get rid of it when really that prolongs it, rather than just kind of embodying it briefly and letting it pass.
So true. It's kind of what we talked about earlier, right? With anchoring yourself and allowing the emotions to pass through rather than holding on to them as our truth. Yeah, I'm glad.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's very Buddhist. It's like there are emotions just passing through me. Like you really can feel it sometimes, like flowing. And it's like if you start trying to stop the flowing, there's shame, there's repression, there's pain. Just let it flow. It can feel overwhelming. It can feel scary. Sometimes the flow is like, no, I'm not the type of person who has this feeling. I shouldn't have this feeling. That's why I shouldn't be sad. I shouldn't be angry. And we kind of have to let go of some of those norms. Be like, I am what I am. I am whatever is authentically happening. Let's just let it out.
It's beautiful. I feel like everybody listening is like, oh, I want to feel that.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I'm longing for more of that
Yeah,
myself. Yeah.
totally. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's hard to do. It's a journey. We're learning a new language as adults, which is hard.
And given how prevalent and paralyzing shame is, it sounds like one worth taking on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
And one worth spreading.
One
You
worth
know, we want
spreading.
to speak that language with ourselves, but
Yeah.
also our children, our friends, our partners.
Yeah. And so, of
So,
course,
you know, because immersion, that's how you learn a language. So we all need to like
that's
do our
right.
part to help like immerse ourselves in a new emotional language of like this openness, this authenticity, this truth.
I love it. Showing up authentically with others and having these conversations is a great way to do that. And reading
Yeah.
AJ's book, Discomfortable, which I will link in the show notes. AJ, before we end, one question I've been asking all my guests is if you have a morning routine, and if so, what is it? How has it helped you?
Yeah. I don't have a very, I like when I heard that you were going to ask me this question, there was a little bit of shame that was like a story in my head. I should have a really good morning routine. And so I wanted to name that like I don't have that. Um, but I do have some things that I can say. As I thought about it, I was like, well, I wake up and I have my dream journal. If I can remember a dream, I want to write down my dreams. Um, I'm like wanting to explore lucid dreaming, and I find it really valuable just to remember my dreams. So that I find that really rewarding. And then if there's time, my favorite thing is to pick up the book I'm reading and read some of it first thing in the morning. I just like to like be in bed and like just reading. That's just like that's a luxurious start to the day for me. And then the other thing I love to do is get some food and do a puzzle. So every morning I'll like get some cereal, and while I'm eating my cereal, I do a little bit of puzzle. There's a part of me that's sort of like embarrassed by that, but it really brings me joy to do this little puzzle routine. Some mornings I just go straight to the gym, so it's like a completely different kind of morning, a smoothie in the gym. But this is my non-gym morning. Um, and then I sort of just have a like a shower routine that I try to put a lot of self-care into. And I think the keys of that for me are that I like to light a candle in the bathroom. And um, I'm really into like bar soap. So like each month I'll like have a new scented bar soap. And that's just like something that I really enjoy. And it's like it doesn't have as much packaging, so I feel like a sense of like there's some like environmental impact there. And then uh I'm really into like a nice body lotion. That's my other like self-care thing in the morning. It's like me time putting on body lotion. That is just so luxurious to like put on body lotion. Yeah, and then there's other little bits to it, and then at the end I try to do this thing where every time I blow out a candle, it's supposed to be a ritual for me to remember to find some gratitude. So I like to blow out the candle and do like a little bow and think of something that I'm grateful for in that moment, and that sort of like sets me off to start working.
Mm.
That's the closest thing I have to a routine, and I don't always do it. Like today I didn't like the candle, I realized. So it's okay.
I notice some people prefer it when I say rituals because routine sounds so structured and not everybody has a structured morning. But what I am hearing from you is a lot of consistency with tending to yourself first thing in the morning in a variety of ways, whether it's a puzzle or a gym, or your routine in the shower and your self-care. There you
Mm-hmm.
are first tuning into you
Yeah.
and your state. And that to me is like the benefit of a morning routine, right? Is when we tune into ourselves
Mm.
first, we really set the tone for the day versus I think people who like maybe just pick up their phone first or just drop into a busy family life, like you're in reaction mode the whole time. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you do have a morning routine.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love
I
hearing
do.
it.
And
Yeah.
ritual really resonates with me. It's like, yes, morning rituals. I
Hmm.
like that.
Maybe I'll switch that word.
Yeah.
Think-
And what's coming to mind for me is that it's easy for me to look around and see problems and create shame that's supposed to motivate me to solve those problems, which it doesn't do at all. Again, it puts me in a kind of collapse state. And so it does, I'm really trying, especially in the morning, to feel pleasure, to feel pleasantness, to kind of give myself like, you're okay. Your imperfect life is okay. Something like that is how, because I actually think that that is more motivating than the oh, you need to fix this energy that I think and have lived my life thinking would motivate me, but has never really worked really fully.
So good. Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing all of that. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
really,
thank you
yeah.
for asking.
Yeah. I appreciate how you share so much of yourself. Like you show up vulnerably and authentic to this conversation around shame, which is hard to do. So thank you for joining us here
Mm-hmm.
in that spirit.
Yeah, I feel a bit emotional now. I felt very welcomed. Your energy, like we co-created this. I don't always feel like I can say to someone like, oh, there's a teariness coming up, but with you in this context, I do. And it's something I do try to do in an interview as well, because it's like walk my talk. Let's talk about it. But like you have given me also a like implicit permission. So I appreciate
Mm.
that.
Thanks, AJ. Appreciate it. Where's the best way for people to tune into what you are doing?
Yeah, I have a website, discomfortable.net, which has info about my book, Discomfortable, and coaching that I do. And I'm on Twitter. If you search Discomfortable, you should be able to find me, even though there's like some vowels missing from my actual handle, but it's pretty clear. Yeah, those are probably the best ways to keep in touch. And I do a podcast as well, but it's been sort of dormant this year, but I am bringing it back this spring, summer. So they can look out for that on whatever podcasting app. And it's also called Discomfortable.
Awesome. We'll put links to all that in the show notes. AJ, thanks again for your time. I've loved this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.